Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. I'm absolutely thrilled to have you with us today as we unlock the literal mechanics of motion. In this explainer, we're going to take a really cool journey. We'll start by looking at basic, everyday repeating movements, and then we're going to progressively zoom all the way down into the invisible, fascinating forces that drive something as simple, yet incredibly complex, as a pendulum swing. By the end of this, we'll have visually broken down exactly how simple harmonic motion and oscillations work, step by step. So let's just dive right into it. Here is our roadmap for today. First, what is periodic motion? Second, the anatomy of an oscillation. Third, the energy tug-of-war. And finally, the three types of oscillations. All right, section 1. What is periodic motion? The absolute foundation of repeating movement. So periodic motion is basically what happens when a movement repeats continuously after a specific amount of time. And what's really interesting here is that specific time requirement. It's not just some random repetition, it has to happen after a very precise, predictable duration. In the physics world, we call this the time period, and we denote it with a capital T. Simply put, if a movement repeats precisely based on T, boom, you have periodic motion. Now, to actually measure this repeating motion, we use a metric called frequency. It's simply the number of complete cycles or complete motions that occur per unit of time. It's basically tracking how often a particle repeats its journey within a set duration. In physics, you'll often see this denoted by the Greek letter nu, which is just the exact reciprocal of our time period. To put that into an everyday perspective, let's look at the standard unit we use for frequency, the hertz. If a particle completes exactly one full cycle in exactly 1 second, that perfectly translates to our standard unit of 1 hertz. So if you ever see a measurement in hertz, just remember, it's literally just telling you the exact number of cycles happening every single second. Moving right along to section 2, anatomy of an oscillation. Let's zoom in a bit on that to and fro movement. Now, an oscillation isn't just any old repeating pattern. It's a very specific subset of periodic motion with a strict, non-negotiable requirement. A particle must move to and fro about a fixed point. It's that back and forth wobbling behavior around a stable anchor that sets it apart from something like, say, a planet orbiting the sun in a single continuous direction. Let's map out the actual geography of this movement. We always start with the mean position. That's the stable, fixed center point we just talked about. Then we have the extreme positions. These are the absolute outer limits on both sides of the mean position, where the particle travels before it has to turn back. Finally, the amplitude is simply defined as the maximum distance between that stable center and the extreme outer edge. Section 3, the energy tug-of-war. We are now looking under the hood at the invisible engine of oscillation. Okay, so this really makes you wonder, if a particle leaves its nice, stable, comfortable center position, why on earth does it always come back? Seriously, what stops it from just flying off into the void forever once it starts moving toward that extreme outer edge? Well, the secret here is the restoring force. Whenever a particle is pushed away from its stable equilibrium, it enters what's basically a potential well. As it moves further out, its potential energy shoots up, and it experiences this restoring force. It acts exactly like the name suggests. It has a constant, relentless tendency to pull the particle back down the potential well, yanking it right back toward that position of stable equilibrium. To really grasp how this force plays out, we've got to set up a direct comparison between the two most critical spots in our particle's journey: the mean position right at the center and the extreme position all the way at the outer edge. Let's see how energy shifts between these 2 points. This right here brilliantly illustrates the core mechanics of simple harmonic motion. Just look at this beautiful inverse relationship. At the center mean position, the particle's speed and kinetic energy are at their absolute maximum, while potential energy hits rock bottom because, well, it's at stable equilibrium. But out at the extreme position, it's the exact opposite. The particle literally has to stop to turn around, meaning its speed and kinetic energy hit zero, while its potential energy reaches its absolute peak. It is a constant, perfect exchange of energy. But here is the real kicker. What happens next? The restoring force pulls the particle back to the center, right? But by the time it reaches that center line, its kinetic energy is totally maxed out. It is moving way too fast to just politely stop in the middle. Because of the inertia from all that kinetic energy, the particle overshoots the mean position entirely. It flies right past the center, starts climbing up the potential well on the other side, and the whole energy exchange reverses and starts all over again. That overshoot is literally the engine of the entire oscillation. All right, section 4, 3 types of oscillations. let's look at how this energy tug-of-war actually interacts with reality. When we zoom back out to the real universe, we can drop all oscillations into three broad buckets: free, damped, and forced. A free oscillation has zero friction. Think of a pendulum in a vacuum. A damped oscillation has to deal with friction, like a pendulum swinging in normal, everyday air. And a forced oscillation has external energy actively supplied to it, like a pendulum being consistently pushed. Let's break these down real quick. Let's kick things off with free oscillations. Honestly, this is kind of an ideal, perfect world scenario. Imagine a pendulum swinging in a total vacuum. Because there is absolutely no air friction or damping whatsoever, no energy is ever lost. The system simply exchanges that kinetic and potential energy perfectly, back and forth, and the motion continues indefinitely. Once it starts, it never stops. But reality is rarely that perfect, and that brings us to damped oscillations. Think of a standard pendulum swinging in the air around us right now. Damping exists here because of air friction, which acts as a non-conservative force. This friction is constantly stealing energy from the system. As the energy bleeds out, the amplitude, that max displacement, gradually shrinks. The swings get shorter and shorter until, eventually, the motion completely fades out and stops cold. So here's a totally practical problem for us. If friction is literally everywhere in the real world, how do we keep an oscillation going? How do we stop a damped oscillation from just dying out and coming to rest? The answer? A forced oscillation. This is where an external force steps in to save the day. An external agent perfectly offsets the damping by continuously supplying fresh energy to the system at the exact same rate that energy is being lost to friction. Because the energy lost perfectly equals the energy supplied, the amplitude stays perfectly constant and the oscillation is maintained indefinitely. Now I want you to challenge yourself here. Think about the physical mechanics of this. If you are that external agent pushing a pendulum to keep it going, where exactly during its swing should you push it to be perfectly efficient? And here is the absolute game changer from our source material. You might instinctively think pushing at the very outer edges makes sense, right? Nope, not at all. If you push at the extreme ends, it won't perfectly compensate because the particle stops before fully reaching the other side. To maintain the oscillation efficiently, you absolutely must supply the energy precisely at the mean position, exactly when the kinetic energy is maxed out. Our source hits the nail on the head right here. It is advisable that we should supply energy at the mean position, when its kinetic energy is maximum. Supplying energy right at that stable center ensures the particle gains exactly the right amount of energy to compensate for the total frictional loss it's going to experience swinging from one end to the other. You have to match your force to the moment of peak momentum. Which brings us to our final takeaway. Physics is telling us something pretty profound here. To efficiently sustain a repeating cycle against the friction of reality, you don't just apply force randomly. You apply it at the mean position, when momentum is highest. So think about the repeating cycles in your own life. In your own efforts, are you pushing at the extreme edges when your energy is completely exhausted? Or are you maximizing your efficiency by acting when your momentum is already at its absolute peak? Thank you so much for exploring the mechanics of motion with me today. Keep asking questions, and I'll see you in the next explainer.